So when you picture a great military victory, what comes to mind? Probably brilliant tactics, right? Overwhelming force. Well, the story of Jericho, that's a whole different ballgame. It's a victory won not with swords and siege engines, but with trumpets, marching, and a strategy that, let's be honest, sounds truly bizarre. Let's dive into this ancient story and uncover its really profound lesson in faith. All right, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at just how impossible this battle seemed. Then we'll get into the very strange, very specific instructions the Israelites were given. We'll see the miracle of the walls coming down, then look at the super strict rules that followed, and finally, we'll unpack the deep theological reason behind this whole thing. I mean, this is the fundamental question, right? This is what the nation of Israel is up against. They've just crossed the Jordan River, they're in the Promised Land, but boom, right in their way is this fortress city that looks absolutely unbeatable. Their entire future is riding on the answer to this one question. What's so fascinating is when you put these two things side by side. On the one hand, you have the standard military playbook of the day. Starve them out, long, drawn-out battles, complex assaults. Human strategy. But then you look at God's plan. It looks less like a military campaign and more like a religious ceremony. The key weapons here weren't going to be battering rams, but marching, shouting, and a whole lot of trust. So let's really set the scene here. Just how unwinnable did this battle look? This wasn't the first time Israel had faced impossible odds. This exact promise was given to them right before the parting of Red Sea. So hearing this again would have been a massive signal. This battle, just like that one, wasn't going to be won by their strength. It was all about divine intervention. You really have to understand, Jericho was the gatekeeper to the whole land. It was this heavily fortified, almost impregnable fortress designed to stop any attack in its tracks. For the Israelites, it was a huge physical barrier, but it was also a massive psychological one. If they could take it, it would prove the land was theirs. If they failed, well, their journey would be over before it even really started. So, you're facing this fortress, and you get your marching orders, and they are, to put it mildly, really, really strange. This was going to be a huge test of obedience. Okay, just walk through this plan with me. For 6 days in a row, the entire army has to march around the city once a day in total silence. The only sound is 7 priests blowing their trumpets. Then, on the 7th day, they do it 7 times. And only after that final lap can they break their silence and let out a huge shout. I mean, this strategy defies every bit of military logic you could think of. And did you notice the repetition? The number 7 is everywhere. 7 priests, 7 trumpets, 7 days, and 7 laps on that final day. In the Bible, 7 is often a number that symbolizes divine completion or perfection. So the strategy itself was literally packed with this powerful symbolic meaning. Now, let's flip the script for a second. Imagine you're one of the people inside Jericho. Think about the fear that's building. The spy Rahab had already told the Israelites that everyone in the city had heard about their God, how he'd parted the Red Sea. They knew this was no ordinary army. So this silent, daily parade, it wasn't just confusing, it was psychological warfare. The tension and the dread must have been building with every single silent lap. So after 6 days of this silent marching, and that final 7th day of circling the city over and over, the moment of truth finally arrives. And just like that, it happens. At the exact right moment, the trumpets blast, the people let out this massive shout, and those nearly impregnable walls just fall down. The victory comes not from a battering ram, but from a sound wave of pure, radical obedience. And this is what so brilliantly illustrates the precision of the miracle. The entire wall collapses, except for one tiny section. The very spot where Rahab, the woman who hid the Israelite spies, lived. Her family was saved because of her faith and her courage, showing that God's plan had room for both judgment and incredible mercy. The victory is total. But the instructions aren't over yet. What happens next is just as crucial as the battle itself, because it reveals the true purpose of this whole conquest. This was not a battle for personal gain. So, to get this next part, you have to understand this key concept of the accursed. Everything in Jericho was to be devoted to God. What that meant was, it was completely off limits for the soldiers. Taking anything, any loot for yourself, was like stealing directly from God, and it was promised to bring disaster on the whole community. This table really breaks it down clearly.
First, except for Rahab and her family, every living thing was to be destroyed. Second, all the valuable stuff, gold, silver, bronze, iron, that wasn't for the soldiers to get rich. It was to be consecrated and put directly into God's treasury. And finally, everything else just burned. The message could not have been clearer. Zero personal profit from this victory.
So why? Why such strict and honestly severe rules? Well, it all comes down to this really foundational theological principle. To understand what's happening at Jericho, we need to talk about the idea of first fruits. See, in ancient Israel, the very first and the very best part of any harvest was given back to God. This wasn't a tax, it was an act of worship. It was their way of saying, we recognize that this whole harvest, all of it, is a gift from you. And Jericho, as the first victory in the new land, was meant to be treated in the exact same way. So let's tie it all together. Jericho was the first city, the first battle. Because the victory was so obviously a miracle, it established right from the start that God, not Israel's army, was the one winning these battles. By dedicating the entire city and all its spoils to him as a first fruits offering, Israel was basically acknowledging that the whole land was his gift to them. This was never a conquest for personal enrichment. It was a holy act of dedication. And so that leaves us with this question to chew on. The story of Jericho really challenges our modern ideas of strategy and success, doesn't it? It suggests that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply obey, even when it makes no logical sense. And maybe, just maybe, true victory isn't found in what we can get for ourselves, but in what we're willing to dedicate to a higher purpose.